Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge.
Hi! This episode is about skills and learning. The increased importance of upskilling and ongoing learning at work. How important motivation is during the initial acquisition and ongoing utilization of skills. And using behavioral science to improve motivation and cultivate a learning culture. To discuss skills, learning, and behavioral science, I'm delighted to be speaking with Trond Aas, co-founder and CEO at Attensi. Attensi is the global leader in 3D gamified simulation training and award-winning AI-powered solutions. Hi, Trond. How are you?
I am doing very well. Very happy to be here.
Great to have you here. And you have a very interesting trajectory. So you started studying physics. Why that?
Yes, that's right. Pretty hardcore stuff. Quantum physics.
Okay.
Yeah. I was really into trying to figure out how nature works, answering the big questions in life, and was very, very interested about that.
And did it work? Did you find out?
Well, to some extent, I got the answers I needed, and that was that quantum physics doesn't provide them in the sense that it goes down to concepts that are basically incomprehensible.
Okay.
And therefore you need to find your answers elsewhere.
I see. Great. So then you went into the Norwegian defense doing some kind of research. And then right. ABB. How did that transition happen?
Yeah, so when I left, the work market was quite hard, and I got my first job as a trainee in ABB. I was very happy about that. I had a year as a conscript in Norway, working as a research assistant on a missile program. Given my physics background, so that was cool. And then my first job was I wanted to go more hands-on. I didn't want to be a researcher. I wanted to work in industry, and that's why I went there.
Then you go to McKinsey and then make a very interesting transition to a visual effects company. How does that make sense, please?
I went to McKinsey basically as a business school. I was intrigued by it to learn about business since I'd studied physics. I was also intrigued about the people I met during the interview process. They were so energizing and smart people. So I was inspired about that. And then you need to be true to yourself. I knew that I was an entrepreneur and I wanted to do something else. And I left McKinsey to join a startup and worked basically in startups and scale-ups most of my career. Part of that was in games companies. And the reason I worked with game companies was I programmed my first game when I was like 14, 15 years old. I'd always been interested in games.
Right.
And I also was always very interested in the creative side of things. I ran a student festival, or I was the head of a student festival when I was in the university, with like humor shows and so on. So I like that creative side of the game business also. So that attracted me. And
as you're getting into gaming, then you started up another couple of companies. How did that evolve to become Attensi, where you are now? Another company that you founded, which obviously has a gamification involved. How did that trajectory work in terms of going from games to something which is much more about sort of training and learning in the corporate environment?
So I had been a lover of games in the sense that I played them, I enjoyed them. I wouldn't say I was a hardcore gamer, but I really enjoyed games. But I think I had a revelation when I was working in game companies about how scientific the creating games was. It was both scientific and creative in a very interesting way. And I had an insight around what mechanisms that games use to really trigger people, to drive engagement and to make learning in a way, because learning games is complex, make learning of games enjoyable by handing out dopamine and endorphin kicks at the right intervals to keep you engaged and enjoying the experience of learning. Yeah.
And getting to higher levels, and just at the right moment, understanding when you need that boost to make you keep going, correct?
Exactly.
So I will say there's one thing about gaming which is very interesting to me, collaborating completely virtually. So certainly hardcore gamers, when they get to a certain level, they have to form guilds of 50 people. They have to collaborate with people that they've never met in person. They've never seen face to face, even necessarily seen an actual sort of visualization of their real face. And yet they're able to collaborate and collaborate very successfully in order to be able to achieve the next level. Based on the science of games, of interacting in sort of virtual spaces, what are some of the insights that you might be able to share that help us understand how virtual collaboration works and virtual learning and learning from each other? Do you have any sort of scientific insights that might help us understand how well that works? There's so many people who say, well, you have to be in person to collaborate. This is not true. And you can see that from some gaming examples. I just wonder what your thoughts were.
I mean, a super interesting question. We could probably spend the whole podcast discussing that, so we won't do that. But I do think,
just a bit of an answer would be great.
But we are social beings. I mean, we function best in social networks.
Yep.
And again, we get kicks because we have been successful as a species, as social beings. We get kicks from functioning as in teams and in social organizations.
Okay.
And great games use that and appeal to that, and it creates success and feeding, like you have the same feeling of succeeding as a team in a game as you do on a football field.
Okay.
You know, and so I think it's really, really fundamental. It's almost tribal. Succeeding as a tribe is incredibly stimulating to us, and games use that in very, very powerful ways. And I think that's what drives that.
Fascinating. So if we're going to be more successful in completely virtual, fully virtual collaboration, there need to be some of these wins to make sure that we feel that we're succeeding, even if we're not together. Fascinating. So why this moving from games in B2C situations to taking that gamification into the corporate market? What was driving you there? Just to sort of see an opportunity, or a stark lack of training, or the opportunity that AI could bring in terms of proposing training in a very different way?
I guess when you start out on something like that, so I had those insights around games. That's really, really important. I have always been, I'm really, really fascinated by learning. I'm a very curious person.
Okay.
I eat books, I sometimes say, so I was always intrigued by learning and development. I just felt that, yes, there were many people who talked about gamification in the learning and development space, but I felt that they didn't really get it
Right.
in the sense of using that science to drive engagement and how to do it. It was a bit like adding points and stars on top of something,
Right.
rather than fundamentally designing the experiences to drive motivation and engagement. And I thought that I had a unique insight there that I could use for something a bit more beneficial, you might say, than games, learning and development, helping people develop. And then when we founded the company, we were all about, and I should say here, I founded a company called Norsim, and my partner, Odd Skarheim, founded the company Attensi, and then we joined forces when we were 3 employees each. So that was the background there. But our ambition was, we can use these principles of games to drive engagement, drive interest, drive motivation, and then we should be able to impact real behaviors and measure that with data. And maybe that's my science background there, really wanting to drill into the data to map out those behavior changes. That was the idea of the company.
Interesting. And so does that include, when you were talking about measuring how much someone has learned, hard skills, I imagine, are easier to track and sort of measure where they have got to. Does your training include soft skills? And if so, how does that track the progress that someone has made in advancing and enhancing a soft skill?
So we try to measure on many different levels, and I think you need to. I think the gold standard, you might say, the best of all, is when you can actually measure real results, real impacts from whatever you're doing. And luckily, many times you can. So you can see that attrition of new employees, for instance, gets reduced with the right kind of onboarding program, and we measure and give that feedback. And then we do, at the same time, we measure behavior inside of the simulations that we make or inside of the game-based solutions that we make, and we correlate those two to see how behavior change in simulation correlates with real-world behavior change and KPI impact. And then, of course, in some cases, you can use validated instruments. There are survey-based instruments that can validate behavior change, and we have used those frequently. So there are many different levels of measuring those things. And in terms of soft skills, there the gold standard would probably be validated instruments. Because it's really hard to measure that in the real world.
Yes, there's so many different elements to it. Hence, with all my work on empathy, that becomes it's all indirect for the most part. With the training that you're bringing, obviously you're focused very much on skills. There is some, your recent research that came out about skills masking. I want to get first to just talking about skills. Obviously, you're looking very carefully at many skills, and what the priorities are and which they are, hard and soft, that people need as they're coming into the workforce and as advancing through the workforce. With technology now accelerated, supercharged by AI, the need to be upskilling faster and constantly is with us already, and this lifelong learning. How have you seen, you started Attensi, I believe, like 12 years ago, or Norsim and Attensi about 12 years ago. How have you seen that sort of acceleration of upskilling, the half-life of skills getting shorter and shorter, skills, the value of skills expiring faster? What progression have you seen? And that need is becoming so urgent. What are your thoughts on sort of where we are and how we're doing in terms of responding to the upskilling needs?
So I think my observations are the same as everyone else is seeing, and I think the AI revolution that we're in the middle of at the moment is just supercharged that speed of change that we're experiencing. So you really need to develop and continuously expand your skills in a way that people didn't used to, at least in, I would say, in the high skills industries. And then this definitely varies from industry to industry, but like in high competence industries, there's an incredible push for that. Obviously, AI is going to be part of the solution to that, and that's a big one. However, I'm going to be a bit contrarian here.
Okay.
However, I think, or at least my recommendation to managers and CEO who think about how will AI affect their organization is you need to understand the specific challenges in the specific jobs that the people that are doing have. And there's not one answer on how best to develop skills. There's not one answer. And for some people, or let me take a step back. For some people, the tools out there to self-develop are already strong. And I've seen over just the last 10 years, I think for quite a few categories of people, their ability to develop strongly over time are already much better than they were 10, 15 years ago. And I can use developers as the best example there. They are learning new languages. They are using new frameworks. They are online. There's lots of tools available, and they do really, really well. And I think you need to figure out, are people self-motivated for learning? And when they are self-motivated, there are lots of tools available. And I think the biggest challenge for a lot of organizations are the areas where people are not very highly motivated. And how are you actually going to help them in those areas?
And where are people least motivated then? I guess that depends on the person. I guess that depends on the person. I mean, it might be somebody who is older, having seen some research, who aren't as motivated to learn tons about AI. It's just like, I don't necessarily want to, or it's too much for me, or I don't need to because I'm going to be retiring soon. Sort of a range of that. Is that fair? Let's just say younger demographics. Where do they have the most discomfort in or at least motivation to be upskilling?
So that's a super interesting. I think a lot of people are looking at Gen Z and saying they need basic communication skills. They are incredibly proficient at digital communication, but actually person-to-person communication on serious topics, they need to develop, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm very often they find that the Gen Z people themselves aren't necessarily aware about that challenge, and they might not have that as a top priority for their own self-development, which might be in different areas. So you need to sort of guide them and make sure that the motivations of the employees are aligned with the needs of the company. I think that's a big part of the challenge.
Before we started, you were talking about how motivation is very important to you and to the learning journey. How do you help, for example, Gen Zs in this specific case, get motivated to be able to communicate better?
So I think the first or the starting point is always recognizing that usually most programs fail on motivation. That in itself is a big thing, you know.
Okay.
We have hundreds of customers that we work with, and I mean our feedback is almost always how motivated are the people to actually learn what you're trying to teach them.
Right.
And if motivation is low, deal with that. You need to ensure motivation. And then there are many ways of doing that, obviously, but part of it is making incredibly engaging learning experiences, because that in itself will motivate people.
Right.
Now, we have found that when you are able to instill a feeling of mastery in people, that has a huge effect on their motivation. And there's a lot of research around that. That if you feel really good, that if you feel you're great at something, you love doing it. And if you're able to build that mastery, you will enjoy doing it. And I think that's a key approach that we're trying to take. If you're great at running, you love running. If you're great at painting, you love painting. I mean, so
if I come into this, however uncomfortable I might have felt coming into this particular learning situation, if I feel that I've mastered it as I leave, that gives me the confidence and the feeling of I've got this to be able to be using it in my work. Fascinating. Okay.
And just as an example, if you let's say you come in, you're not great with people, you haven't been having a lot of conversations, and now you're in a service occupation where you need to talk to people all the time.
Right.
You're hesitant, you're low on confidence, you struggle, and you try to avoid those situations. However, if you practice that in a game-based solution and you get really good at it by talking to a lot of virtual customers, and you experience, I'm actually pretty good at this. I'm actually a master at this. Then you create work enjoyment and a feeling of mastery. And that has so many such impact on retention, on enjoyment, on performance, on it's like a magic pill, you might say, for performance.
It's very interesting to discuss this because there's the skills gaps are significant at the moment. And, you know, it seems that CEOs, no matter how much they believe in, you know, what can be done with AI, the potential of AI, however that may be integrated and utilized, there isn't enough training of AI skills and integration in all kinds of ways. But the issue with skills is much, much greater and much broader than just AI. And I've written some, you know, posts and had a lot of discussions about the experience gap that young people, as they're coming into the workplace for entry-level jobs, they're being asked for 2 to 5 years worth of work experience. Now, that is because so much of the easy stuff has been automated away, AI and, you know, pre-AI. And so, because this has been an issue since 2019 and before, what can be done about that, both in Norway and the UK and elsewhere, where you have seen, you know, perhaps the educational institutions stepping up and trying to close that gap that way, but also in the onboarding experience. I know that Attensi does quite a lot of work, you know, in really trying to change that onboarding experience. I think one, that is making it longer, correct me if I'm wrong, but also what else can be done in that onboarding to help employees really get up to speed, not necessarily just on what's needed for that particular role that they're taking on, but also generally, right?
Well, I think the big challenge that a lot of investments in training and learning development have is that the return on investment has been unclear. And I think, yes, more and more people realize that they have these skill gaps, the companies, and they realize they need to invest more. I think there is a realization there.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge to the, if you can call it the L&D community, is to focus on impact and to focus on data and to focus on proving ROI. I think for most companies underinvest in their onboarding journey because they are unsure about the payback. So they know they have a challenge, but they are unsure on how to calculate the return on investment, and therefore they don't really focus on it. So I do think that there's a beginning trend, I would say, at quantifying the effect of the onboarding programs. But I do think that's critical for companies to make those higher investments to bring people up to the skill levels that are needed. So focus on data, focus on ROI, focus on impact. So that's a key thing. And then I think particularly for the next 5 years, probably, that skill gap is probably going to be felt particularly acute because, as you're pointing out, institutions, the teaching institutions are probably behind on this issue.
I think so.
So the students coming out are not trained to work in an AI-centric environment, but the jobs will be for a lot of sectors. And I mean, the institution needs to step up and close that gap. I do think that particular challenge will improve over some years. So that's part of it. And then a last thing is, how do the society enable people to continuously upgrade their skills and get new certifications? I think there's a big challenge there also, making sure that the educational institutions are less around, oh, you're educated for 5 years and now you're going to use your education for the next 20 years. More certifications, more shorter programs, more informal programs.
Yeah, the micro-credentialing.
I think it's also part of the answer. So, but of course, this is a societal challenge. So obviously, every part of the society needs to be involved in solving that.
Somebody posed it to me probably 5 years ago, like, whose responsibility is it? Is it the person? Is it government? Is it the company? The educational institutions? I mean, who is responsible for this upskilling and the ongoing upskilling? And I think, probably one of the easiest answers is everybody's.
Yes.
That we all need to be trying to do. But starting with, I usually come from, starting with the person, that the more motivated they are, and it really is validated by what you're saying, if they go into a training paid for by a company with motivation, they're going to be more successful and have a better experience and be more skilled as they come out of it. Going to the research now, you were mentioning about that I mentioned about skills masking that you did, that was recently published. Let's understand more about this, because it seems that it didn't surprise me at all, particularly from younger people who don't have confidence, who don't want to be asking questions, they don't want to be fired because they're not competent or whatever that might be. I'm always telling my kids, like, ask questions. What were some of the key findings that perhaps alarmed you the most?
Well, I think almost everyone, or a large majority, felt that their onboarding would have significant improvements, and that their onboarding had effects in lower confidence than they would have liked, lower work performance than they would have liked, and poor task handling. So most people experience poor onboarding, and most people are convinced that it affects their work afterwards.
So that was why they were sort of hiding
and skill masking,
perceived lack of skills, whether they were real or not, right?
Yeah, and the skill masking part is that people are actually hiding when the challenges that they are having on the skill side, which of course makes the whole job so much more difficult.
Right.
How do you deal with that? It's very related to culture. I think you need to create a trust-based culture. So I think your advice to your children is excellent. Do ask questions, but they will only do so if they feel that they're in a trust-based environment.
Sure. Yeah.
So how do you deal with skill masking? Well, focus on creating trust. I think that's the essential part to help alleviate that.
In all organizations, there are enormous skills gaps across the employee base, across the workforce. The ones that do have really comprehensive skills inventories are very aware of where those skills gaps are. The ones that do not yet have those skills inventory and need to be mapping it as develops have much less clarity as to where the problems are. With the knowledge that you have really focused on skills as well as worker behavior, what do you suggest to companies who are really trying to get their arms around this, which I would say is a pretty gnarly problem, because it goes to the core of how a company can stay competitive, how it sort of stays at a base level of competitiveness, and then starts to track and understand and map and project forwards in terms of the skills that are needed, and then how it's going to, help employees, encourage employees, motivate employees to be able to bridge those gaps and succeed for themselves as well as for their business.
Well, I mean, I think the skills-based organization it's going to be a big focus in the future to map those skills and understand much better where their employees are. I think that's a great initiative. My approach would always try to be top-down and focusing on what are the core skills in our organization.
Yep.
What are the core, most important skills, and work top-down, and then end up with a set maybe of 10,000 skills that you need to improve on. And the reason I'm saying that is that at least all the companies I've spoken to who are building the skills mapping or skill-based organization, they end up with like 10,000 skills.
No,
and you are going to need to allocate each employee to those 10,000 skills.
Right,
and they end up creating this incredibly complex system with skill mapping. And I think some of them feel they're losing focus on actually skill improvement because the skill mapping eats up all their resources.
Right.
So I think at least my recommendation would be focus on the core skills that you are looking for in various roles, and make sure that your training program addresses those skills, those core skills, and then expand it over time. Accept that this will take time to establish, and then make sure that the training programs you develop actually affect the skills, so that you're not left with a non-engaging e-learning that someone completes, and then they self-assess their skill to be high. And then you end up with a tool, with a system that's not going to give you anything. And I think there are good ways of implementing a skills-based organization, and there are bad ways of doing it. And I think a lot of people are experiencing the challenges, as you said, with doing it at the moment.
So focusing on priority skills. Also, I can imagine after doing the training, the Attensi's training, and doing this gamification, how do you help organizations with the long tail to make sure that once I may have confidence, I may have starter confidence in my new skill that I have just acquired? How do you help me keep my skill with my team so that I can keep practicing it, and I then can also infuse that skill or share that skill with other people in my team? How do you encourage that? Because that is that continuous learning compounding that really helps an organization keep competitive and keep growing with that learning mindset.
Yes, and I think in truth, Attensi there needs to be part of the solution and not the solution. Mm-hmm. So I do think the organization needs to have an attitude of continuous learning and a commitment to being a learning organization, because we create fantastic and I think the best solutions in the world, of course. But you also need the annual conversation, and you need, in our case, you need the monthly development conversation, and you need the feedback structures and the continuous learning, developing mindset to succeed at that. And I think that's a really, really important thing. And the second thing, in my view, is that most companies lack clarity on what it is they're looking for. So they haven't defined, and the best example I have is when you come to an organization, and what are your values? And the values of the organization is trust, openness, and integrity. I'm just giving you 3 examples,
right.
you know, and that's fine. Yes, you need to be good people, I agree, but that's not really defining who you want to be as an organization or how you're going to stand out as a competitor. And I think actually Amazon is a great example of a company that's done this really, really well, because they have very clearly defined behaviors that they're looking for. And by having those clearly defined behaviors, and they're actually implemented throughout the organization, and people know what they should strive for and what they should look for. And then I don't know them well enough to know if they're actually good at, as a learning organization, to drive those principles. But if you have clear principles, if you have that set up to drive that continuous learning, I think that's what's required. And Attensi is part of that solution by, you know, having great solutions for those skills that you need to develop. But I don't think an IT system in itself will solve that, and I just need to be honest on that.
I appreciate the honesty. Trond, what haven't I asked you that I should have done?
Maybe I can make a comment to sort of to general the general audience. For me, is always whatever it is that you're doing, be realistic about the status of your employees, what kind of motivation they have, what kind of challenge they have, and whatever kind of skill development program you're making, make sure that it fits with the target group. I think there are a lot of buzzwords out there at the moment, and there are a lot of buzzwords surrounding AI at the moment. And I think a lot of people think that one system or one approach will fit with all the different employees and all the different sectors and segments of employees. And I think it needs to be a lot more nuanced than that. You need to find the right kind of solution for the right kind of challenge. I think that's incredibly important. And then if there's one thing that I always want people to remember is, are your people motivated? And if not, address that. That's what you need to address to be able to develop your organization.
Perfect note to end on, Trond. Thank you so much. This is such a critical issue. Where people's skills are, how to understand them, what's realistic, what's not, and how to motivate people to upskill, to understand where they are, because without that, it's very, very hard for business to move forward with their employees and have their employees move forward as well. So really, really appreciate you sharing the journey that you've been on and all the behavioral elements to motivation and learning and upskilling. A lot of learning for me too during this interview. So thank you very much for your time, Trond.
Thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed it. Had a great experience here. Thank you.
Thanks again so much to Trond Aas, co-founder and CEO at Attensi. You can find out more about Trond on LinkedIn and go to Attensi's website, attensi.com. Immediate action tip: learning motivation and skills usage are cultivated through mastery. Help employees get a sense of their achievement to encourage enhanced performance and growth. How is your team performing? What new skills have they acquired this year? Are they using those skills fully? My new course, Empower High-Performing Teams, enhances leaders' ability to build stronger, cohesive teams and improve results. Check out modernworklife.co to find out more. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it and share it with a friend. You can also write a quick review wherever you watch or listen. For more curated, useful insights, articles, and information, please follow me on LinkedIn. And you can sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter at flexos.work. Thanks for watching. Until next time.